I came home buzzing after the lawyer's call, ready to tell my husband that my late grandmother had left me her shares in the family construction company plus the lake house in Muskoka, easily worth $22 million. Instead, I found him on the porch with his mother, a folder of legal papers already in his hands. "The house is sold," he said, "and you have 10 minutes to pack whatever fits in your car." I just smiled. "What's so funny?" he snapped. "Actually," I said, pulling a document from my bag, "the title you just sold belongs to the trust I manage. I'm Vanessa, 31, a forensic accountant with the CRA's audit division, and before I tell you the rest, let me say this. I had been watching my husband and his mother for 14 months, and I had documented every single dollar." The taxi pulled away from the curb of our home outside Oakville, leaving me on the driveway with my suitcase and a heart that hadn't stopped pounding since the reading of the will 3 hours earlier. I'd flown back from Calgary that morning after burying my grandmother, the woman who raised me after my parents died in a car accident when I was 9. She never trusted my husband, not once in the 6 years we'd been married, and she used to tell me, in that dry way of hers, that a man who can't look you in the eye when he talks about money is a man who's already planning to take yours. I should have listened sooner. My husband's name's Bennett. We met at a fundraising gala in Toronto when I was 25, fresh out of my CPA designation, and he swept in with that easy charm that men with old family money seem to be born with. His mother, Marguerite, owned a controlling stake in a mid-sized construction firm that had built half the condo towers along the waterfront, and Bennett worked there as something between a vice president and a figurehead. Nobody at the company could ever quite explain what he actually did. I found that funny at first. I stopped finding it funny around year 3, when I noticed that large sums kept moving out of accounts that were supposedly mine, routed through subcontractor invoices that didn't match any actual subcontractors. I didn't say anything. I am, by training and by temperament, a person who builds a case before she opens her mouth. So when I walked up that driveway with my suitcase, exhausted, grieving, and carrying news that should have changed our lives for the better, and found Bennett standing there with Marguerite beside him in her cream wool coat and her pearl brooch, looking at me like I was a tenant who'd missed rent, some part of me wasn't even surprised. "What is this?" I asked, looking down at the papers scattered across the porch boards where he'd shoved them into my chest. "Divorce," he said. "I used the power of attorney you signed when your grandmother was sick to handle the house while you were dealing with your family stuff. I sold it this morning, funds already moved offshore. You have 10 minutes. Marguerite stepped forward, smoothing her coat, her voice honeyed the way it always was right before she said something cruel. "Don't make a scene, Vanessa. The neighbors are watching. You always did have trouble knowing when something was over." I looked past them at the house my grandmother had helped us put a down payment on, the house with my name on the original deed alongside Bennett's, the house that 3 weeks earlier I had quietly transferred into an irrevocable family trust the moment I'd started noticing the missing money, with myself as trustee and my grandmother before she passed as the named beneficiary or protector. Bennett had no idea. He'd signed the trust paperwork himself, buried inside a stack of documents I told him were refinancing forms for a better mortgage rate. He never reads anything before he signs it. That has always been his greatest weakness, and as it turned out, my greatest asset. I just smiled, I told him, because the house you sold this morning isn't mine to lose. It belongs to the Whitfield Family Trust. You sold an asset you don't own, Bennett, using a power of attorney that I revoked 4 months ago, the day after I found the first fake invoice. His face did something I'd never seen it do before, a kind of collapse, fast and total, like a building coming down in a controlled demolition. "You're lying," he said, but his voice had already lost its certainty. "Call the buyers," I said. "Ask them how their lawyer's title search is going this afternoon." Marguerite's smile thinned into something brittle. "This is absurd. You're a bookkeeper playing detective, dear. Don't embarrass yourself. I let that one go." I'd been letting things go for 14 months, collecting receipts, bank statements, the names of 3 shell companies registered in Marguerite's maiden name, and a pattern of withdrawals from my grandmother's care fund that started the exact month Bennett learned she was terminally ill. I hadn't told anyone yet, not even my best friend Holly, who kept asking why I seemed so calm whenever Bennett came home late smelling like another woman's perfume. I picked my suitcase back up, walked past both of them, and let myself into the house with a key Bennett didn't know I'd had recut. I sat down at the kitchen table where we used to eat takeout on Friday nights back when I still believed in this marriage, and I called my lawyer, a quiet, terrifyingly precise woman named Odessa Kwan, who had been waiting 14 months for this exact phone call. It's happening, I said. Good, she said. I'll file the injunction tonight, and Vanessa, call the RCMP Commercial Crime Unit in the morning. We have enough now for fraud, and probably elder financial abuse, given what they did to your grandmother's care account. Behind me, through the window, I could see Bennett pacing the driveway with his phone against his ear, and Marguerite standing very still, staring at the front door like it had personally betrayed her. That night, I didn't sleep in the house. I drove to my cousin Imogen's place in Mississauga and sat at her kitchen island while she made tea. Neither of us drank, and I told her everything. The missing money, the forged signatures on 3 home equity draws, the way Marguerite had been quietly siphoning funds from her own company's pension plan and routing them through Bennett's consulting fees. The fact that my grandmother's final months had been paid for, in part with money stolen from illettré clients of a financial advisory boutique. Marguerite had a silent stake in. Imogen kept saying, "You should have told me." And I kept saying, I needed it to be airtight first. If I'd accused them with half a case, they'd have buried me, and walked away clean. Bennett's family had 3 generations of lawyers on retainer. I had spreadsheets, and I needed every column to be unimpeachable. The weeks that followed were the strangest of my life, quiet on the surface, ferocious underneath. I kept going to work at the audit division like nothing had happened, because nothing had happened yet, not officially. Bennett texted me 40-50 times a day, oscillating between rage and a wheedling kind of tenderness I hadn't heard from him in years. Marguerite sent one email, formal and clipped, suggesting we resolve this like adults over lunch at the club, as though what was coming for her could be resolved over a Caesar salad and a glass of Niagara Chardonnay. I went. I wanted to see her face when she realized how much I actually knew. The club overlooked the water, all dark wood and old money trying to look older than it was. Marguerite was already seated when I arrived, a pot of tea between us like we were old friends set in a small misunderstanding. "You've put my son in quite a state," she said by way of greeting. "I imagine he's in quite a state," I said, considering the fraud charges. She didn't even blink. That was the thing about Marguerite. She had spent 30 years convincing herself that rules were for other people, and along the way she'd actually started believing it. "There's no fraud here, dear. There's a family handling family business. The trust your grandmother set up, the company shares, all of it, it should rightfully come back into the family it was meant for. You were never really part of this family. You know that." My grandmother's lawyer would disagree, I said. "So would the 11 elderly clients whose retirement accounts your boutique has been quietly draining for the last 3 years. I have their names, Marguerite. I have the wire transfer records. I have the email where you instructed your advisor to manage the optics around Mrs. Featherstone's missing $200,000. For the first time since I'd known her, Marguerite went pale, the kind of pale that has nothing to do with the weather. "You don't understand the situation," she said, her voice dropping. "I understand it perfectly. I'm an auditor. Understanding situations is the entire job." She reached across the table then, gripping my wrist hard enough to leave a mark, and hissed that I had no idea what I was dealing with, that families like hers didn't go down quietly, that I would regret this for the rest of my life. I looked at her hand on my wrist, and then at her face, and I felt something settle in me. Not fear, which I think she expected, but a kind of cold clarity. "You're right that I don't know everything," I said, pulling my hand back. "But I know enough. And in about 3 weeks, so will the crown." I left her there with her tea going cold, and I drove straight to the RCMP detachment to finalize my statement. The arrests, when they came, were almost anticlimactic compared to the months of waiting. 2 officers showed up at the construction company's head office on a Tuesday morning and walked Marguerite out in handcuffs past a lobby full of her own employees, her cream coat still impeccable, her chin still lifted, performing dignity right up until the elevator doors closed. Bennett was picked up separately at our house, my house, legally the trust's house, trying to load the last of his belongings into his car before the asset freeze hit his accounts. I wasn't there for either arrest. I was at my desk at work, finishing a report, because Odessa had told me there was no need for theatrics. The paperwork would do the talking now. What followed was 8 months of court proceedings that I won't pretend were anything but exhausting. Bennett tried at first to claim he hadn't known where the consulting fees were really coming from, that his mother had handled the business side, and he'd simply trusted her, a defense that fell apart the moment the Crown produced his own emails coordinating the fake subcontractor invoices line by line. He eventually pleaded to a reduced charge in exchange for testifying against Marguerite, which told me everything I needed to know about how deep his loyalty to her actually ran the moment his own freedom was on the line. Marguerite did not plead. She fought it for months, hired the best defense counsel her remaining unfrozen assets could afford, and stood in that courtroom in a charcoal suit insisting, right up until the verdict, that she had only ever been protecting her family's legacy. The judge did not see it that way. Between the elder fraud against her own company's pensioners and the financial abuse charges tied to what she'd done during my grandmother's final illness, she was looking at real time and a restitution order that would strip her of nearly everything. The company shares, the lake house she'd always assumed would pass to Bennett, the boutique advisory firm, all of it liquidated to repay the people she'd robbed. I was in the gallery the day the verdict came down. I watched her hear the sentence, watched the color drain out of her face the way it had at the club months earlier, and I felt to my own surprise, not triumph exactly, but something quieter, a door closing. Bennett called me once, after his own sentencing, 18 months suspended, plus restitution he'd be paying off for the next decade, and asked in a voice I almost didn't recognize why I hadn't warned him, why I'd let him walk into all of it, instead of telling him what his mother was doing. I tried for years in smaller ways, I said. You never once chose to hear me. You chose her every time, right up until choosing her cost you everything. I didn't do this to you, Bennett. You and your mother did this. I just kept the receipts. He didn't have anything to say to that. The trust still owns the lake house in Muskoka. I go up most weekends now that the legal matters are finally settled, usually with Imogen and sometimes with Holly, and I sit on the dock in the evenings with a cup of tea, watching the loons, thinking about my grandmother, who always said that the quietest person in the room is usually the one keeping score. I inherited more than money from her. I inherited the patience to wait for the truth to finish building its own case, and the certainty that smiling sometimes is the most dangerous thing you can do to someone who underestimated you.